Please be advised that this recorded webinar has been edited from its original format, which may have included a product demo. To set up a live demo or to request more information, please complete the form to the right. Or if you are currently not on CSC Global, there is a link to the website in the description of this video. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Take control of your business licensing process. My name is Annie Triboletti and I will be your moderator. Joining us today is Brian Bartnicki. Brian is the business license sales engineer at the forefront, assisting customers with their industry-specific requirements, which range from research, portfolio management, and renewal services. Brian has worked with CSC for more than a decade, offering his expertise in the field of license compliance. And with that, let's welcome Brian.
Thanks, Annie. So today I'm going to talk about a handful of subjects. First, I'm going to briefly touch on CSC as a whole. I'm then going to dive into the types of business licenses that are out there and what does that mean exactly, because the term licensing is very broad and vague. Then we're going to talk about the challenges that companies or individuals may reach or come to with licensure, and then consequences of noncompliance, and finally how CSC can help, followed by a Q&A session. So let's chat about CSC. We've been around since 1899. We have about 180,000 corporate customers in multiple markets, about 10,000 law firms, some of the largest financial institutions, and over 3,000 from a whole customer base perspective. We manage 65% of the best global brands, and our workforce, growing year to year, is over 2,500 employees, and we're very proud of that. So let's start with talking about the types of licenses. Now, first thing I hear from people is they say, oh, I'm talking about a license to do business in a specific state. Well, you have your registration with the Secretary of State. You're incorporating. It's an LLC or a corporation, but that's not what we're talking about at the CSC world of business licensing. What we're really diving into are industry-specific examples. Now, there are many industry-specific examples that I'll talk to some of them. But there are a few common terms of licensing that I do want to address, I think, that are very important. Some common examples you may hear are occupational tax license or privilege tax license, or maybe business tax receipt or professional license. Now, these are generally, like a professional license, you may run into an accountant. You may run into individuals that are in the trades. For local tax receipts, privilege tax, and occupational, those are going to be more geared to city, county, and a couple state-level licenses. And we'll dive into some of those in a little bit. From the industry perspective, I would ask all of you to you probably all know what your companies do. Some of you might be in insurance. Some of you might be in restaurants. Some might be in architecture, engineering, contracting, collection, warehousing, manufacturing. Again, there's so many different types of businesses that are out there. And what I'm going to really dive into are some of the challenges that come about due to all these complexities. So let's dive in from here to the challenges of licensing. First thing that I really hear from people when I have conversations with them are, hey, how do I start searching what's needed for my business? You know, maybe I'm going to open an office in Paramus, New Jersey, and I don't know where in the world I need to start my search. I don't have the time to do it. I have 8 things on my desk that have higher priority than trying to figure this out. I don't have the man hours. I don't know if I go to county level. I don't know if I go to city level. And even places like Jersey and Pennsylvania, for that matter, even have village requirements, township requirements, not just city, county, and state. There's actually over 160,000 governing authorities across the country. You know, we're talking about 51 Secretary of State offices if we count D.C., but we're talking about 160,000 of all these other governing bodies across the country. So it's a big challenge. Where do I go, and how do I spend the time to do it? And to go back to the industry-specific example, how do I know what regulations there are in my field? For those of you in the pharmaceutical world, you might be unsure if you need a controlled substance license or a manufacturing or distribution license for pharmaceutical drugs. There's just all these different variables that are unique in industry to industry, and I can keep going on and on. But these are really big challenges that people run into. What is relevant to them? So after research challenges, the next item that comes to mind when I talk to customers is how do they file these licenses once they've understood what they are? Where do I send the application? It sounds something that's very basic, right? Where do I send it? Sometimes you may have to walk it in. Sometimes you can send it, you have to send it overnight. Sometimes there's simply a P.O. box. It doesn't give you any direction. You don't know where you're filing it. It's just a black hole. And to the black hole point, how do you check the status and can you get it faster? So these are some key challenges, and I'll talk about specifically why. How many of you on the phone, or some of you on the phone, might be in the trade industries? You might be in the contracting world. And a lot of times when you're bidding on jobs, it's required that you have either a temporary license or a license in hand to actually perform the work once you've been awarded the bid. Unlike the Secretary of State, where today anybody can register with the Secretary of State and pay additional money, here, California, here's an additional $300 to look at this in 24 hours. When you're dealing with these authorities that are very specific, maybe a contracting board or a city and county or any state level or local regulation, there really is no such thing as expedited service. So a board might meet every 3 months. If you're a security company in Nevada, they meet every 3 months. So you could submit your application, but you're not going to hear for 90 days. Some people might be in the city, county office. You file it, you call, nobody picks up. There's 2 people that work there. They work 4 days a week from 10 to 3 o'clock. And if they're on the phone with somebody else, you're not getting through. So there's a sense of urgency in this world. And you really can't ever get a hold of anybody. You can't pay them additional money to look at it. You find yourself spending more time trying to get something that you need to physically operate. And it creates a lot of stress, obviously, and it affects business as a whole, because you can't do business a lot of times without these operational industry-specific licenses. And so we've done the research, now we've applied and we've obtained the licenses. The next step is really going to be more futuristic, and that's going to be the renewal. So when are these renewed? Again, we're talking about a lot of jurisdictions out there, and it's going to be variable depending upon where you are and the industry or the type of license. So for those of you in the insurance world, you might find, you probably know that the birthday of an individual determines when they renew their license to sell insurance. Maybe they're selling life insurance or property and casualty or flood insurance. Some states might require their birthday to be the day that they renew it. In other industries, you might have a retail shop or maybe run a restaurant. You might find times where it's always December 31st. So it's all going to be variable depending upon different laws and ordinances that are amongst all these authorities. And to that point, the next challenge that people run into is how do they physically track all of these things? From a scalability perspective, when you grow, right, again, you physically are taking time. Maybe you're using an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe you have other ways to access database. But you always find yourself manually entering new file numbers, new dates, new entities that own it. It's a very manual process generally that people run into. Again, with all their other responsibilities that are going on. So now that we've discussed the types of licenses that are out there and some of the challenges, I think it's also important just to talk about consequences. Now, this may never happen to you. You might have run a tight ship never have a fire drill occur. But it is important to know that licensing is a different animal when it comes to making sure that you are compliant. With the Secretary of State, I always like to revert back to that for explanation purposes. Sometimes it's just as simple as paying a past due annual report and a fine. A lot of times, though, when you were dealing with the operational, location, or industry-specific licensing, it truly can affect generating revenue and doing jobs. And so I'll dive into some of those right now. First, fines and penalties seem to be an obvious one. A lot of times, though, the fines and penalties are going to be based off of revenue or employees. So it's really important that renewals or filings aren't missed, or maybe that you filed for something. An example, maybe you needed a license, but you just said, I don't need it, I'm gonna ignore it. Now you go to apply for it because the governing body comes to you and say, hey, you've never filed for this, you need to. And they ask you a question that says, when did you start doing business in our jurisdiction? And if it was 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, a lot of times they're going to back tax you on that time in which you've been doing business. Not all of them are going to do that, but it does happen. So it's important to make sure that, going back to research, that you are compliant where you need to be. If you are late and there's a tax calculation, the fines could range from $25 to thousands of dollars. We've seen people that end up owing $30,000 to $50,000 worth of penalties. Another trigger could be how many employees you have physically working. Sometimes it's just based off of an employee count. But fines and penalties are going to be what could be most common. Next are lawsuits. A lot of times, we think about just being default as an organization, and you could lose a lawsuit. If you don't have a license that's filed, and it's not active, and you are sued for whatever reason, obviously it doesn't bode well for you having a favorable outcome. So that is something, and there's the fees that are associated with hiring lawyers if they're not your own, if you have external counsel. Business closure. This is something that a lot of companies think may not happen, but it depends on how strict the jurisdiction wants to enforce it. So there are places out there that will have inspectors go around to make sure that every business in their jurisdiction is compliant. If any of you on the phone have business in Chicago or DC, you may be familiar with this, where not only do you have to have the license, but if you don't have it posted, that counts as not having the license. And in some jurisdictions, when you don't either have it or have it posted, and after X violations, they will just simply close the location. So a couple things that come from this. Number one, depending on when it happens and how slow these jurisdictions are of actually processing these licenses and these payments, you may lose multiple days worth of revenue. You can be shut down, and that's just going to cut the bottom line. You may also, in Chicago, for example, not only do you get a violation, but you also get a court date if you're not compliant. And you have to go in front of a judge and show proof that you have the license. And eventually there's more fines. Across the country in certain places that will look, they know who's in their limits. They know who they want revenue from. And the longer that this is out there, the other localities are trying to copycat and doing their own way of managing these penalties and fines. But business closure is definitely something that can occur. Arrests, again, it sounds extreme, but there are instances where if it comes down to it, a location manager can get arrested. I've even heard stories through customers where they had prior managers that had left the organization, had warrants out for their arrest, and when they got a speeding ticket, because they were listed on a license yet no longer employed by the organization, they were actually arrested, and they, as a result, sued their former employer. So jurisdictions, you think it's extreme, but it does in fact happen. For those of you in the trade markets, inability to bid on jobs is a really big thing. If you want to win a bid and you don't have a license, it's difficult. I used this example earlier. Trying to get a license quickly, but you're not able to submit your bid for RFP many times. Not just in trades, but it could be in multiple types of jurisdictions. Delays in introducing products or new services. For those of you that are in tangible goods, maybe you're in retail, maybe you're in research and development. For the example I always like to give is maybe you're in the toy market or video game market, and you do not actually have licensure in order. You may be unable to actually mass deliver and market those products if you don't have the right licenses. So it's really important that all that due diligence is done. And these are just some of the examples. The very last one, I think, really comes down to reputation. If I am deciding that I want a service or a product, one of the first things I might do is search the internet, and some things that may come up could be negative articles about location, could be non-compliance. You don't want a negative image out there. And if I'm doing research as just a layman and I see that, I'm probably going to lean towards another organization or another company to get help. So I'm sure these are all things that people think about in this licensing world, but just know you're not alone. They are true risks and consequences that can occur. But have no fear. CSC can help in this endeavor. We can definitely help in a couple ways. We have a dedicated team of customer service folks that have the knowledge in multiple industries, and I'll dive into ways which we can help in a second. We don't outsource any of this to a third party, which we're very proud of. CSC is the only provider in the market that has the true infrastructure in the sense that we do not outsource any of it. There are no situations where we're outsourcing research or filings or renewals. Everything is done here at CSC. We have a team of 55 people that are in this business. We can help you in research, not just research in general, but I'll talk to some of these specific ways which we can help. If you are opening a new location, we have a service simply called New Location Research, where there's an industry-specific questionnaire that you would complete, and we would be able to tell you, based on what you're doing and how you're doing it and where you're doing it, are there regulations in licensing? Not just, hey, this city and county has a license. It's based on the work that's being conducted. Are you subbing any of that work out? Are you managing it with your own employees? Are you going door to door? Are you having a company vehicle going in certain jurisdictions? What is it that triggers that license, and is one needed? That's going to be more for an expansion model, and we call that New Location Research. Another type of research service we have is simply called Existing Location Research. And there are two types of avenues in which customers can use that. One would be you just decide you don't have confidence in that all your locations or all the states or places that you're doing business are in fact compliant from a licensure perspective. So the Existing Location Research is going to first identify what you need, but also confirm you have it. We're going to go to the jurisdictions. We're going to pull copies of it. If you don't have it, we'll know there's a gap, that there is something that is required, and we'll let you know what that is. But another high value that research will provide is we will let you know what you may have over-licensed. Maybe you filed something unnecessarily. And I'm going to take a step back with that example and mention, when I first started talking about how people always ask, how do I find the time and what do I need? Well, a lot of times due to those constraints or due to those challenges, I find that people will just register for licenses that are not required just to be safe. I'd rather be over-licensed and not have to worry about anything than risk being non-compliant. And that might be fine for the first year, but what if you're doing business for 5 years? Now you're paying for 5 years of unnecessary fees. And sometimes those fees could be thousands of dollars. So the existing location research is really a way, just to the Cliff Notes version, it's going to tell you what you have, what you don't have, and what you have but you don't need. Another way that the existing location research can provide tremendous value would be through acquisition. If you're in the property management business and you're acquiring properties, maybe you're going to manage them, maybe you're going to collect rent, maybe you're going to do all the operational responsibilities that are for that property. The federal ID number, the entity name, and the address, and of course, I'm using property management as the example, a property management questionnaire. We would be able to do all that legwork for you and let you know what, in fact, was there and do that analysis. After research, we can help you with the filings, whether they be filing or applying for the new ones, or, in fact, the renewal. And in a little bit, I'll show you the portal in which we would manage those on your behalf. But just know that we can monitor all the due dates for you. We can track all of the file numbers, all the license images, but give you that ability from a tracking and management perspective. And I mentioned you can outsource it to us, where we'll give you that dedicated individual who will advance all the fees. In the event that we need additional information, we will reach out to you for it. But there is that turnkey solution. Either you send us the information you have, or we do that research, and we can help manage your licenses. Awesome. So I think now it'd be really nice to briefly show you the portfolio of how we can centralize your license data within your CSC account. Some highlights that I will go into before. Number one, with our management system, you will notice that it's going to be 24/7 web accessible. It's going to centralize everything together, allowing, if CSC is managing your licenses, it's going to help you prevent the fines and penalties. We're going to give you, I'll show you all where all the dates are going to be. It's also easy to implement. You can have as many users as you would like. There are no costs for users. You can have a limited access where you hide what certain people see. You can have a read-only access where they could simply just view the material. And then you can have an admin where you truly control adding users. And if you ever want to add your own items, you absolutely can. But one of the things that I want to mention that I don't have on here, but I think it's very imperative to talk about before I dive into the presentation, is simply security, and that we are, CSC is a SOC 2 compliant organization. It is also something that separates us in the marketplace. I mentioned infrastructure with how we don't outsource anything. The reason that's important is the security of your information. Companies may not know who is able to see information regarding either employees or locations or revenue numbers, things of that nature. So we're very proud in the fact that all the data that's in here is SOC 2 compliant. So it all is managed by CSC in that secure manner.